Welcome, and I hope you enjoy today's special video, which is all about how to make and build a worm farm, worm tea factory. I will show you the start to finish processes and how the mechanism works inside to collect the worm casting and the worm tea. And I hope you enjoy that build and it can inspire you, because they call it the black gold of the garden. Using worm castings and worm tea is fantastic. It takes a little bit of effort, and hopefully you'll be able to follow along and share your tips and ways that you like to use our friends the worms. So join me in today's video and let's get building. I'm going for a 4-tier system. The bottom tier will be where I'd extract via a tap the worm tea. Tier 2 and tier 3, the middle tiers, they will have compost and cure, and the top tier up here, that will have half full, and that's where the garden scraps will go into. In the first tier here, this is where I'm going to be collecting the worm tea. So I've bought a water butt tap here, which will allow the on and off for the flow of the worm tea. Put some water in there, just going to make sure it works okay. Brilliant. So that's nice and secured and sealed. We'll move on to the next stage. Okay, here you can see the bottom tier and the first tier. I've linked them with the small holes, and then if you see the principle, when you're going to have the other tiers above it, when you want to water it through, the water will drip it through like so, taking all that worm castings and goodness to make your worm tea. And then once it reaches to a good level, then obviously you can use your tap to collect that goodiness. So this is tier 3, and I've slightly modified it. Instead of having a lid in between, I'm going to fill the compost so it just sits like so. And as you can see here, the worms can travel through the portals, or I call it worm elevator. They're going to go up and down their worm elevator, and again it happened on the same to the top here. And the holes will link here where the worms will travel through and have a great play area. So great, well, I'll move on to the next stage and I'll show you what's happening. Just in the workshop, and what I'm going to do now is just measure how high the worm flow through system is going to be, because what I'm going to do is build a nice surround for it. I've bought a decking floor piece, and I've got some wooden stakes which will be the perimeter around it, just constructing the base for it to sit on. And I've got height now, so you can see we can add to that if we want to lift up the tap pipe, so we can make sure we capture all the good worm tea. So what I'm going to do now is, with these posts here, I'm going to create the height. Okay, so I've got the frames posts in, and now I build the crossbars just to give it a bit more support. And what I've left at the back here is actually a nice size where I can probably put something there behind it, maybe look attractive. So you could even have a pot with something growing up there, nice fragrance. You could even have mint to keep rodents away or things like that, or a storage bin or something like that, but gives you options. So a little tail on the end there. There's the first cross beam, and what I've done, I've enabled it so that lip there, I know exactly where to position it. It just slides in lovely there, and that will help the lock in. Okay, there you can see the bottom of the frame. So I've made sure it's integral going right round. Okay, so that's the framework. I'm going to reuse the pallet balls, and I will face it like so. So I'll bring that right up, nice, and then I'll do it at the front as well. So a lot of cutting, let's go for it. Great, so I've cut the pallet wood, and I'm going to measure up, and then I can face the front, sides and backs. Under candlelight I continue with the build. Only joking. Just been working a little bit through the evening, and got the sides on, both the right and the left there, and I'm just working on the front section. I'll have a think about that, but I'm going to close down for the evening and pick it up in the morning. So morning's arrived, and here's the construction so far. It reminds me a bit like a siege tower, where you'd wheel it up to castle walls and then the flap hatch opens up. But I'm liking the look. It's going to be painted up. Just going to finish a couple of things on it. Hello, have you come to have a look at the worm farm? Okay, so I've made the front hinge panel and latch. If I show you what I've done, I've just attached 2 hinges here and got a little hook system which will grab onto that. So when you want to grab your worm tea, you lift it up and then you just take the latch here and that will just hook on like so. Access your worm tea, and then when you're done, again just take the latch off and that will drop into place. Great, so that's fronted the worm farm. What we've got to do now is look at the top to get a handle. I want something that I can lift off, and then the back as well, because I want some sort of easy of access. So I'll crack on. Okay, so I've made the back part. What I've done, I've utilised the distance between these 2 gaps here and made a slide down cover. I'll fill this section in here with some wood. The principle is I've put a handle in here, so if I wanted to get to them I can just use the handle and lift that out. Okay, and that comes right out, as you can see. Just to pop it back, put it back, it slides it down. Great. So let's make the top. Yeah, so the roof lid has been made. What I've done, I've just constructed some extra flaps down the side and put a handle on here, so when you lift it up, it's lifted up, and then it will help guide you back into position. I've also just given it a slight tilt so the rain will run off. So I've just done that by adding another piece of wood here, which will give an angle away. So yeah, almost there. Painted up the worm tea farm and moved in position, and I've just started to put a waterproof layer underneath the lid. So if I show you, if I lift this up here, you can see here I've just stapled underneath there a double layer of a waterproof lining. What that will help with will be just ensuring no excess water slips in there. So brilliant, I'm really pleased with that. Okay, so my first delivery's arrived of a coir block or brick. That's C-O-I-R, coir. Put in the coir block into the container. I'm going to fill it with water, allow that to expand. So I'll come back in 20 minutes. So the next process now is to start filling the containers with a mixture of coir and compost or manure. But first I'm just going to line the bottom here just with some cardboard and pierce some holes in it. It still allow the drainage through, and eventually the worms will obviously eat the cardboard. I made the first cardboard template and I've pierced it with some holes with using a skewer. Here's the coir. That's looking excellent. So, put that in here. Okay, so I've got the coir in here. That's beautiful, lovely. And then what I'll do now is I'll add some organic soil compost. Okay, so I've got some compost and I'm going to add that to the coir. I'm just going to mix that around, which should be great. Okay, lovely. Let us start getting that added to the bin. I'm quite happy now with the system. This is the mechanism that will be working within the worm hotel. So we have a 4-tier system. The first tier here is where I've installed a tap which will allow the worm tea to be extracted from. So at the top I'll pour a watering can which will then collect all of the goodness from the worm castings and the nutrients that the worms are put into the soil, and that will be collected from the tap. Tier 2 and Tier 3 have got coir and compost in, and the worms will be living in there, and they'll be able to travel up and down all Tier 4, Tier 3 and Tier 2. That's all interconnected with a series of holes for the worms to travel. So technically speaking, what will be happening, so I have worms in all sections here, and they will be doing their work and working hard, making the worm castings and putting all the nutrients in the soil. The top tier here is where I will be putting the food scraps in. I've only filled it probably about a third full, and what you'll do is be putting the scraps from your food wastage in here. So a few things you can't put in the top: garlic, eggshells, onions, potato peels, citrus, things like that, and meat. Don't put that in the top level, but anything else, pop your scraps in. And so you want to sort of dig a trench and put the food in, then you can cover it back up with some compost. And then what I've got here is a worm blanket. It's a Hessian sack, and I've put some waterproof lining inside. And once you've put your scraps in, you just want to cover them like that to keep them warm, and then you can put your lid back on, lock it in place, and great, the worms are working. I've got on order some tiger worms, about 200 of them, and I'll be placing them in Tier 2, Tier 3 and Tier 4, and then they will be able to travel back and forward, back and forward, back and forward, and doing all their hard work. And then I'll be able to collect the worm tea and use around the garden. You can also then grab the worm castings and again use that around the garden. A working practice, learning as you go along. I'm not an expert, I've just had some great fun trying this, and it looks like it's going to work well for me. I've put the processing centre, the mainframe within the hotel cafe. Let's show you how it looks. So from the top you've got a single or two-handed lift off, so you can move that to the side, and there you go, easy access. So you can open your clips, lid comes off, and underneath the bedding, that's where you'll be putting your food scraps. So very simple system, and then you tuck them back in when you're finished, and you put your lid back on, tuck that down, here you go, there we go, clip that back in, and that's all set, and then the worms will carry on working. You take your lid, and because I've designed these nice side flaps, I know for the profile it will fit perfectly. So that will just sit nicely on there, the lips will just hang over the sides. We've got the back part where we can move this forward, and we've got a handle here which will allow us access easy to the containers. So when you want to get your worm tea, grab yourself a watering can, take the lid off, put it to one side, remove the lid, take the blanket out as well, and you just water through quite a lot. Don't worry, the worms won't mind it, it's just replicating the soil. And what will happen, that will come right down through to the very bottom area, and then when you're happy how full you've got it, you can either turn your tap or have it constantly open to collect your worm tea, and that's how you extract your worm tea. So you can modify it however you like. I've gone for a build design. Some people use simply plastic containers, or they strain the worm castings that way, but I quite like the tap system, and I've really enjoyed this build, so however you do it, just remember, if you can get your worm castings and worm tea, it will benefit your garden and your plants and your veggies, and really put back into the nature. Great news, the worms have arrived, and here they are. So if you have a look here, I've got 200 tiger worms. I've got something for them to eat, and we're going to get them into their new home, and they'll be producing us fantastic worm tea and worm castings. Right, great, so I've got the containers out of the wormery. Let's distribute the worms. Here they are. Just grab the scissors. So this is tier 2. Let's just get these worms to their new home. So there they are. You have a look at that. They're very happy tiger worms. Let's get them in there. Okay, that's great. We get some more in here. There we go. See that? And don't worry, they will bury themselves down because they like to come out of the light. And then this is the top tier. This is where our food's going to go. So what we do, again, remember, remove your bedding, and then let's get the worms in here. There's the remainder of the tiger worms. Pop them in there, lovely. They're very happy, very excited. Just mix them in. And now what I'm going to do, here's some of the food scraps. I'm just going to make a little bit of a trench and put that in there for them. Lovely. And cover that back up. And they are all fed. Get their worm blanket. Tuck them up for the night with their worm blanket. Right, and in here I'm just going to put them back. So that's the second tier. Here comes the third tier. Let's just make sure these worms are nice in there. Lovely. Tuck them down. Okay. That one goes in like so. That's great. Just popping the top tier in like that. Great. Okay, so that's all set. Last thing to do is grab the lid. We've got their lovely waterproof cover on it, and pop them to bed. Thank you for joining me on this worm adventure. I hope you too will invest in our great friends the worms, where you can enjoy the worm castings and worm tea to really boost and vitalise your veggies and gardens. From Seagull Gardening, until next time, have a great day.